The air in our house on Thanksgiving always smelled the same. A warm, heavy blanket woven from roasted turkey, cinnamon from Mom's apple pie, and the faint, sweet scent of old wood from the floorboards my father had laid down with his own 2 hands. It was the smell of home, of safety, of every good memory I owned. But for the past 2 years, a new scent had been added to the mix. It was sharp, cold, and expensive. It was the smell of David's cologne, and it never blended in. It just floated on top of everything else, a constant, unwelcome reminder that this wasn't just our home anymore. It was his, too, that I stood in the doorway of the dining room, my hand resting on the cool, smooth wood of the frame. The late afternoon sun, the color of weak tea, slanted through the bay window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It illuminated the scene like a carefully staged play. My mom, Linda, was bustling around the table, her face flushed with heat from the oven and a nervous sort of happiness. Her laugh was a little too bright, a little too loud, as she set down a steaming boat of gravy. Across the table, my younger brother, Ben, who was 17 and all gangly limbs and teenage apathy, was actually smiling. He was listening, completely captivated, to David. And there was David, my stepfather. He sat at the head of the table, in the chair that had always been my dad's. He leaned back, a picture of relaxed ownership, one arm draped over the back of the chair. The fabric of his crisp, white shirt strained slightly against his broad shoulders. The light caught the silver in his perfectly styled dark hair, making him look distinguished, handsome. He was telling some story about a business deal, his voice a low, confident baritone that filled the room and seemed to polish the very air. He gestured with his hands, a heavy gold watch glinting on his wrist. And then I told him, "If you want to play in the big leagues, you can't show up with a little league bat," David said, and Ben let out a bark of laughter. "That's savage, David," Ben said, his eyes shining with admiration. "It's just business, Ben," David said, his lips curving into a smile that never, ever reached his cool, gray eyes. "You have to know your own value. You have to project strength." His gaze flickered over to me, just for a second, and the smile tightened. It was a look that said, "See? I'm in charge here. I've won." That my stomach twisted. I forced a smile onto my own face and walked into the room, the old floorboards groaning softly under my weight. "Everything smells amazing, Mom." Her face lit up with genuine warmth as she saw me. "Oh, Chloe, honey. Good." I was worried the rolls were a little dry. She rushed over and fussed with the collar of my sweater, her hands still warm from the kitchen. Her touch was soft, familiar, but I could feel a faint tremor in her fingers. She was always on edge around David, desperate for everything to be perfect, for our new, blended family to look as flawless as one of his tailored suits. "They're perfect, Mom," I reassured her, squeezing her arm. David's voice cut in, smooth as silk. "Of course they are. Your mother is a miracle worker. I don't know how she does it all." He stood up and walked around the table, coming to stand behind my mother, his hands landing on her shoulders. He began to knead the tense muscles there, managing this big old house, taking care of all of us. "She's a saint." Mom's eyes fluttered closed, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Oh, David, stop." But she leaned back into his touch, melting under his hands. It was a performance I had seen 100 times, and it always made my skin crawl. He wasn't comforting her, he was branding her, marking his territory in front of us. The air grew thick, and the comforting smell of Thanksgiving dinner suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. "So Chloe," he said, his eyes finding mine over the top of my mother's head, "how are the job applications coming along? Find anything yet? Or are we still enjoying a post-college vacation?" The question was casual, but the barb was sharp and deliberate. It was designed to paint me as lazy, a freeloader. I had graduated from State University 3 months ago and had been applying for graphic design jobs relentlessly. The market was tough, and I'd been living at home to save money. It was a point of friction he loved to press on, like a thumb on a fresh bruise. Before I could answer, my brother piped up from the table. "Give her a break, David. It's hard out there." I shot Ben a grateful look, but David just chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "Oh, I know it is. I'm just concerned. Chloe is a smart, talented young woman. We wouldn't want her to lose her momentum. This house is a comfortable place, maybe a little too comfortable. It can make you soft." His words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He was framing his criticism as concern, his cruelty as care. It was his specialty. My mom shifted uncomfortably under his hands, pulling away slightly. "David, please. It's Thanksgiving. Let's not talk about all that now." "You're right, my love," he said instantly, his voice dropping into a tender murmur meant only for her. He leaned down and kissed her temple. "Forgive me. I just want the best for our family." Our family. The words echoed in my head. This wasn't a family. It was a slow-motion hostile takeover. My dad had passed away 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had shattered our world. For 3 years, it was just the three of us, me, Mom, and Ben. We were a tight, grieving unit, finding our way back to the light. Then Mom met David at a charity gala. He was a financial advisor, charming, successful, and he had swept her off her feet. He said all the right things, remembered the little things, and made her laugh again. At first, I was happy for her. I wanted her to find love again. But then he moved in, and the subtle changes began. It started with small things. He replaced my dad's worn, comfortable armchair with a stiff, black leather monstrosity that felt cold to the touch. He'd suggest new recipes for my mom to try, slowly phasing out the old family favorites. He reorganized the garage, my dad's sacred space, and misplaced a box of his old tools. Each change was a quiet erasure, a deliberate overwriting of our past. When I tried to talk to Mom about it, she'd get defensive. "He's just trying to make this his home too, Chloe. Can't you try to be a little more welcoming?" So I tried. I really did. But the feeling of being an unwelcome guest in my own home only grew stronger. Now, as we sat down to eat, the tension was a physical presence at the table. David carved the turkey with a surgeon's precision, the electric knife buzzing loudly in the strained silence. He placed a perfect, glistening slice on my mother's plate, then Ben's, then his own. He paused, the knife humming, and looked at me. "Chloe, white meat or dark?" he asked, his smile a perfect, polished veneer. "None for me, thanks," I said, my voice tight. "I'll just have the sides." My mom's fork clattered against her plate. "Chloe, don't be rude." "It's all right, Linda," David said, his voice a balm of false reason. "Maybe she's a vegetarian now. It's all the rage with her generation. Exploring new identities." He said the words exploring new identities with a faint, mocking lilt, as if I were a child playing dress dash-up, my fists clenched in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "I'm not a vegetarian, David. I'm just not hungry for turkey." The meal passed in a blur of forced pleasantries. The mashed potatoes tasted like chalk in my mouth. The cranberry sauce was bitter. The only sounds were the scrape of silverware and David's voice, a constant, rolling monologue about his successes, his opinions, his plans. He was slowly, methodically, pushing me out of my own family, and my mother was letting him. She was so desperate to be happy, so afraid of being alone again, that she couldn't see the bars of the cage he was building around her. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and my mom had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the emotional effort of the day, I found myself wandering into the study. This had been my dad's room. The walls were still lined with his books. The air still held a faint, lingering scent of old paper and the pipe tobacco he used to smoke on special occasions. But David had made his mark here, too. A sleek, modern black desk now sat where my dad's old oak one had been. A laptop, thin and silver and humming with quiet power, was open on its surface. It was his computer. A fortress of passwords and firewalls. He was meticulous about his privacy, always closing the laptop, always taking his phone with him, even to the bathroom. My heart started to beat a little faster, a low, nervous thrum against my ribs. I had no reason to be in here, no reason to be looking at his things. But a nagging, persistent feeling, a gut instinct I couldn't shake, told me that the answers to the wrongness in our house were hidden somewhere inside that machine. I glanced over my shoulder, down the dimly lit hallway. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Ben was upstairs, the sound of a video game faintly audible. The house was asleep. My hand trembled as I reached out and touched the cool metal of the laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating a login screen. It was asking for a password. Of course it was. My shoulders slumped. It was a stupid idea anyway. What did I even expect to find? I was about to turn and leave when my eyes caught something on the desk. Tucked beside a leather-bound planner was a small, silver picture frame. It was new. I'd never seen it before. I picked it up. Inside was a picture of a younger David, standing on a boat, his arm around a blonde woman I didn't recognize. They were both laughing, and they looked happy. On the bottom of the frame, a small engraved plaque read, "Sundance, always Sundance." What an odd word. Was it the boat's name? A nickname? My mind raced. David was a man of immense ego. He saw himself as the hero of his own story, a Robert Redford type. It was a long shot, a ridiculous, movie plot kind of idea, but my fingers were already moving over the keyboard before I could second-guess myself. SUNDNC, that I held my breath and pressed enter. The screen flickered, and then, impossibly, the desktop appeared. Icons for spreadsheets and financial programs were arranged in neat, orderly rows. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I was in. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to be fast. My eyes scanned the screen, and my mouse hovered over the email icon. It felt like a monumental violation of privacy, a line I had never thought I would cross. But then I pictured my mom's tired, anxious face and the condescending smirk on David's, and I clicked. The inbox loaded, a long list of messages. Most of them were from financial institutions, market reports, business associates. It was all boring, corporate jargon. I felt a wave of disappointment, and then a pang of guilt. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a jealous, paranoid stepdaughter, just like he always hinted, that I was about to close the program when a name in the sent folder caught my eye, Mark Renner. I recognized the name. Mark was David's lawyer, a man as slick and polished as he was. Why would he be emailing his lawyer on a regular basis? Curiosity, now a roaring fire, took over. I clicked on the most recent email, sent just last week. The subject line was simple, re the timeline. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. The email was short, just a few paragraphs, but the words on the screen seemed to leap out at me, each one a separate, vicious blow. My breath hitched in my throat, and I had to clap a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. The room, which had felt warm and familiar just moments ago, suddenly felt like a walk-in freezer. The air was thin and sharp, and the friendly shadows in the corners now seemed to hold menacing shapes. The email was a cold, calculated blueprint for the complete destruction of my family. He was outlining a plan, step by step. Step 1 was to get my mother to add his name to the deed of the house, citing it as a necessary step for our financial security as a couple. He mentioned he was already working on it, wearing her down with talk of market instability and protecting their future. Step 2 was to convince her to update her will, making him the sole beneficiary and executor, framing it as a way to simplify things for the kids so they wouldn't have to deal with probate court. He wrote, and the words are seared into my memory forever, Linda is a romantic. She's emotionally fragile and susceptible to suggestions, especially when they're packaged as acts of love. I anticipate having both documents signed within the next 6 weeks. But it was the last paragraph that made me feel like I was going to be physically sick. Once the assets are secured, he had written to his lawyer, we can proceed to the final phase. Her health has been delicate lately, and a quiet, stress-free life somewhere smaller, perhaps a managed care facility, would be best for her. The kids are nearly grown. Chloe is already a burden, and Ben will be off to college soon. It's the most compassionate course of action, and it will, of course, free up significant capital. Let's discuss the specifics of power of attorney on Monday. My vision blurred. The words swam in front of my eyes. A managed care facility. Free up significant capital. He wasn't just trying to push me out. He was planning to steal my mother's home, her money, her entire life, and then what? Lock her away. The sheer, sociopathic cruelty of it was breathtaking. This whole time, his every kindness, every gentle touch, every word of concern had been a lie. It was all part of a monstrous, predatory scheme that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I looked around the room, at the books my father had loved, at the life he and my mom had built, and a rage so pure and so cold washed over me that it burned away all my fear. He was not going to get away with this. I saw the printer on the corner of the desk. My movements were stiff, robotic. I clicked print. The machine whirred to life, the sound deafening in the silent house. It felt like it was screaming my betrayal. One page, then a second, slid into the tray. I snatched them up, the paper still warm. I folded the email, my hands creasing the paper with sharp, angry lines, and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans. Then, I logged out of the computer, closed the lid, and backed out of the room, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I had the proof, but what on earth was I going to do with it? The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I walked around my own home like a ghost, the folded paper in my pocket a toxic secret, a burning weight against my leg. Every time David spoke, his smooth, reasonable voice grated against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Every time he touched my mother's arm or called her my love, I had to physically restrain myself from screaming. I could see the puppet strings now. I saw the calculation behind his every smile, the predatory gleam in his eyes that I had mistaken for affection. He was a monster wearing my father's clothes, sitting in my father's chair, and slowly devouring my mother's life. And she couldn't see it. She was happier than I'd seen her in years, floating on a cloud of his compliments and affections. She hummed as she cooked. She laughed at his stupid jokes. That Saturday, I watched them from the kitchen window as they worked in the garden together. He was tilling the soil in the rose garden my dad had planted for her, and she was watching him, her face full of adoration. He was literally digging up my father's legacy, and she was smiling. The sight of it made my stomach churn with a sickening mix of anger and despair. How could I do this to her? How could I detonate a bomb in the middle of her happiness, even if that happiness was a complete and utter lie? I knew I couldn't just confront her alone. She would defend him. She would say I was being dramatic, that I had misunderstood, that I had violated his privacy and was twisting his words. She would choose his comforting lies over my horrifying truth. I needed to do it when she couldn't immediately retreat into denial. I needed a witness. I needed Ben. The problem was Ben was completely under David's spell. David had bought him a new gaming console for his birthday. He talked to him about sports and cars. He treated him like an adult. To Ben, David was the cool, successful father figure he had been missing. I found him in his room that afternoon, the air thick with the smell of stale pizza and the sound of digital explosions. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the frantic, flashing colors on his large monitor. "Ben," I said, standing in his doorway, "can I talk to you for a second?" He didn't look away from the screen. "In a minute, I'm in the middle of a raid. It's important." Something in my voice must have cut through his concentration. He grunted, mumbled something into his headset, and then swiveled his chair to face me. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud. My heart was pounding. This was the first step. "It's about David," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His face immediately hardened. "Oh, come on, Chloe. Not again. Are you still on that? The guy adores Mom. Can't you just be happy for her? He's not who you think he is, Ben." Yeah, he's a secret evil villain who wants to take over the world," he said, rolling his eyes and turning back to his game. "You've been watching too many movies." Tears of frustration pricked at my eyes. I pulled the folded email from my pocket. My hand was shaking again. Just read this. Please. If you read this and you still think I'm crazy, I'll drop it. I'll never say another word." He sighed, a long, dramatic sound of teenage suffering, but he took the papers from my hand. He unfolded them, his brow furrowed in annoyance. I watched his face as he started to read. I watched the casual irritation slowly drain away, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, and then a dawning, sickening horror. His knuckles went white as he gripped the pages. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale under the flickering screen light. He read it a second time, his mouth slightly ajar, his breathing shallow. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were wide and filled with a fear that mirrored my own. "Is this real?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Where did you get this?" "His computer," I said, my own voice trembling. The password was Sundance. He didn't question me. He didn't get angry about the violation of privacy. He just stared at the paper in his hands, at the cold, hard words that spelled out the end of our lives as we knew them. The sounds of his video game, which had filled the room just moments before, were now silent. He had forgotten it completely. In the silence, we just looked at each other, two kids on a ship, who had just realized the captain was deliberately steering them towards an iceberg. "A managed care facility," Ben said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He was going to put Mom in a home. "And take everything," I added, my voice thick with emotion. "The house, the money, everything Dad worked for." He crumpled the paper in his fist, his face a mask of fury. "That son of a bitch," he snarled, and the venom in his voice was so raw, so potent it startled me. The hero worship was gone, burned away by the acid of the truth. I had my ally. We decided we would do it the next day. Sunday dinner. It was a ritual David had insisted on. A time for the family to connect, he'd always say. The irony was nauseating. We planned it out in hushed, urgent whispers in Ben's room. I would bring it up, and Ben would back me up. We would be a united front. We would not let him isolate one of us. We wouldn't let him twist it. The next evening, the atmosphere in the house was thick with unspoken dread. Every tick of the clock was a countdown. I felt a cold knot of fear in the pit of my stomach. My mom had made lasagna, David's favorite. She was humming, oblivious, as she pulled the bubbling, cheesy dish from the oven. The smell of baked tomatoes and garlic filled the kitchen, a homey scent that was completely at odds with the violence I was about to unleash. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where my suspicion had crystallized just a few days earlier. David was in a fantastic mood, regaling us with another story about a business triumph. He poured a glass of red wine for my mother and himself, the dark liquid gurgling from the bottle. "A toast," he said, raising his glass. The crystal chimed as it caught the light from the chandelier above. "To family, the most important investment a man can ever make." My mom beamed at him, raising her glass. "To family," she echoed, her voice soft. Ben and I just sat there, our water glasses untouched. David's smile faltered slightly as he looked at us. "What's wrong with you two? Cat got your tongue." This was it. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. I took a deep breath, the air tasting metallic. "I have a question for you, David," I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected, clear and cold. He raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his wine. "Oh, by all means. Ask away." "I was just wondering," I said, my eyes locked on his, "what your plans are for Mom's delicate health." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My mom's smile dissolved, replaced by a look of utter confusion. She looked from me to David, her brow crinkling. "What are you talking about, Chloe?" she asked. David set his glass down, the sound a sharp crack in the stillness. A flicker of something, anger, fear, passed through his eyes before being replaced by a mask of patient amusement. "Chloe, I'm not sure I understand. Is this another one of your little dramas?" "He thinks you're fragile, Mom," Ben said, his voice low and shaking with rage. He was clenching his fork, so hard his knuckles were white. "He thinks you need to be put in a home." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Ben, what a horrible thing to say. David would never." "Wouldn't I?" David said, his voice dangerously soft. He was looking at me now, his eyes like chips of granite. He knew. Somehow, he knew I had found something. "Chloe, what have you been doing?" "I've been reading," I said, and with a hand that was surprisingly steady, I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the folded, crumpled pages of the email, and slid them across the polished wood of the table. "Your emails, to be specific." The paper came to a stop right in front of his plate. For a moment, no one moved. It was a tableau of horror. Me defiant and terrified. Ben, radiating pure fury. My mother, her face a canvas of disbelief and dawning pain. And David, his charming mask finally, irrevocably, cracking. He stared at the paper, then up at me, and his face was transformed. The charm, the warmth, the concern, it all evaporated, leaving behind something reptilian and cold. His lips pulled back from his teeth in a sneer. "You went through my computer?" he hissed. "David, what is this?" my mom whispered, her voice trembling. She reached for the paper, but he was faster, snatching it off the table. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening, and then he ripped it into pieces, the sound of tearing paper like a gunshot in the silent room. "It's nothing, Linda," he said, turning to her, his voice shifting instantly, becoming smooth and placating again. "It's a complete misunderstanding. Chloe is trying to drive a wedge between us. She's always been jealous of our happiness. It's not a misunderstanding," I shouted, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "He was planning on having you declared incompetent. He wanted to put you in a facility and steal the house." "That's a lie," David roared, his voice booming in the enclosed space. He stood up too, his face red with fury. He was pointing a finger at me. "She is a poisonous, ungrateful little girl who can't stand to see her mother happy." "Stop it!" Mom shrieked, her hands covering her ears. Tears were streaming down her face now. "Just stop it, both of you." She looked from his furious face to mine, her expression utterly lost and broken. "David, tell me it's not true. Tell me what she's saying isn't true." He turned to her, his whole demeanor softening in an instant. It was a masterful, terrifying performance. He reached for her hands, his voice dropping to a wounded, loving murmur. "Linda, my love, look at me. Would I ever do anything to hurt you? This house, this life, it's all for you. For us. She's twisting things. She's making things up." For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was going to work. I saw her waver, saw the desperate hope in her eyes that this was all just a terrible nightmare. She wanted so badly to believe him. But then Ben spoke. He hadn't moved, but his voice cut through the air like a knife. "I read it too, Mom." David's head snapped toward Ben, his eyes narrowing. "Before he ripped it up," Ben continued, his voice steady now, filled with a cold, adult certainty I had never heard from him before. I read every word. Free up significant capital. That's what he wrote. He called you an asset. That one word, asset, did what my pleading and shouting never could. It was cold, impersonal, financial. It was David's world, not ours. It pierced through my mother's denial like a shard of ice. She pulled her hands out of his, her face crumbling. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a look of such profound betrayal and devastation that it felt like a physical blow. She stared at him, really stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. The handsome, charming man was gone. In his place was a stranger, a predator. "Get out," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing that David's face contorted with rage. The mask was gone for good. "Don't be ridiculous, Linda. This is my home." "No," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her body trembling but her spine straight. "This is my home. It was my husband's home. And you will get out of it. Now." He took a step towards her, his face dark with menace. "You will regret this." Ben was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between David and our mom. He might have been 17 and skinny, but in that moment he looked 10 feet tall. "You heard her," Ben said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out before I call the cops." For a long, tense moment, David just stood there, his chest heaving, his gray eyes darting between us, calculating. He looked at my mother's shattered face, at Ben's unwavering stance, at the cold fury in my eyes. He saw the checkmate. He knew the game was over. Without another word, he turned, strode out of the dining room, and a minute later, we heard the front door slam shut with a deafening, final crack that echoed through the entire house. The sound hung in the air, followed by a profound, ringing silence. And then a small, choked sob broke from my mother's lips. She collapsed back into her chair, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. Ben and I rushed to her side, wrapping our arms around her. We held on to each other, a broken, grieving family, surrounded by the ruins of a Thanksgiving dinner and the lingering, cloying scent of a liar's cologne. The house was finally quiet. The monster was gone. But the damage he had left in his wake felt vast and deep and irreparable. The days that followed were muted and gray, like a photograph left out in the sun. The house felt both empty and overwhelmingly full at the same time. Empty of his loud, confident presence, of the sound of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floors, but full of the ghosts of his lies. Every room held a memory that was now tainted. The black leather armchair in the living room was a monument to his arrogance. The newly organized garage felt like a violation. We moved through the house in a kind of daze, speaking in quiet, gentle tones, as if a loud noise might cause the whole structure, and our fragile family, to shatter completely. Mom was a wreck. She barely ate, she barely slept. For the first few days, she just sat on the sofa, wrapped in my dad's old knitted afghan, staring at nothing. Her grief was twofold. She was mourning the man she thought she loved, and she was grappling with the terrifying reality of the man he actually was. The shame was eating her alive. "I was so stupid," she whispered to me one night, her voice hoarse from crying. We were in the kitchen, the only light coming from the small lamp over the sink, casting long shadows on the floor. The air smelled of the chamomile tea I had just made for her, a small, inadequate comfort. How could I have been so blind? He was right there, in our home, and I welcomed him in. I let him get close to you, too. "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, my voice fierce as I wrapped my hands around her cold ones. "He's a professional. This is what he does. He finds good people, and he uses them. You wanted to be happy. You deserve to be happy." But my words felt hollow even to me. We had all been victims of his manipulation, but she was at the epicenter of the blast. Her trust, her love, her sense of security, it had all been a carefully constructed lie designed to benefit him. Ben was a quiet, angry presence in the house. The easygoing teenager was gone, replaced by a young man with old eyes. He spent hours online, researching David. He discovered a trail of broken hearts and drained bank accounts stretching back a decade. 2 other women, both widows like Mom, who had lost their homes and their savings. David was a serial predator, and we were just his latest targets. Presenting this information to Mom was brutal, but necessary. It was the final nail in the coffin of her denial, proof that this wasn't about her shortcomings, but about his monstrous nature. Slowly, painstakingly, we began the process of erasing him. The first thing to go was the armchair. Ben and I dragged the heavy, cold thing out to the curb on trash day. Watching the garbage truck's mechanical arm lift it and crush it in its metal jaws was deeply, savagely satisfying. We packed up his clothes, his books, his grooming products. We boxed up every single thing he had brought into our lives and donated it all. We wanted no trace of him left. One afternoon, about a month after he left, I found Mom in the garden. It was a chilly, overcast day, and the rose bushes my dad had planted were just bare, thorny stalks. She was on her knees in the dirt, her hands covered in soil, a small trowel in her hand. She was carefully, methodically weeding the bed. I watched her for a moment, her movements deliberate, focused. "What are you doing?" I asked gently. She looked up, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. For the first time in weeks, her eyes looked a little clearer. "He never pulled the weeds," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He just tilled the soil around them. He made it look nice on the surface, but he was just churning the poison back into the ground." She looked down at a stubborn dandelion she was working to uproot. "It's going to take a long time to get all the roots out. But if we don't, they'll just choke out the good things." I knelt in the dirt beside her, the damp cold seeping through the knees of my jeans, and I started to help. We worked in silence for a long time, the only sounds the scrape of our tools in the earth and the distant cry of a bird. We were a team again, the three of us. Ben came out later and started raking the dead leaves from the lawn. There was a new, unspoken understanding between us, a bond forged in the fire of betrayal. We were survivors, and we were learning to lean on each other again. That spring, the roses came back, fuller and more vibrant than they had been in years. The house started to smell like home again, like my mom's baking and clean laundry and the faint, sweet scent of old wood. Ben went off to college in the fall, but he called every single day. My mom started taking a pottery class, her hands finding a new, creative purpose in shaping clay. I finally got a job at a small design firm downtown. Life was moving forward. The scars were still there, of course. My mother was more cautious now, her heart carefully guarded. I was less trusting of easy charm, my eyes always searching for the truth behind the smile. But we were healing. We had saved each other. One evening, I was sitting on the front porch with Mom, watching the sunset. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass. The sky was a beautiful, bruised palette of purple and orange. We weren't saying much, just enjoying the comfortable silence. "You know," my mom said, her voice soft in the twilight, "I was so angry at you that night, for ruining everything." She turned to me, her eyes clear and full of a love that was fierce and deep. "But you didn't ruin everything, Chloe. You saved everything." I leaned my head on her shoulder, a lump forming in my throat. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the guilt over the pain I had caused her, finally began to lift. In the end, David hadn't destroyed us. He had ripped our family apart, but in doing so, he had forced us to find our way back to each other, to rebuild on a foundation not of charming lies, but of hard, unbreakable truth. He had taken so much, but he had given us one thing we would never lose again, each other. The house was quiet, it was safe, and for the first time in a very long time, it was truly sweet home.